Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dina Taylor. I'm Vice President of our Global Solution Architecture team here at HireVue. I am joined today by Rebecca Wright from BP. And Rebecca, I will turn it over to you in just a moment to introduce yourself and then take us through your presentation. Today's discussion is all about how BP maintained business continuity with virtual graduate recruitment. At the conclusion of Rebecca's presentation in just a moment, she and I will have a little bit of Q&A, and then we will turn it over to all of you and answer the questions that you might have. So please leverage the chat Q&A feature within this web conferencing solution so that we make sure that we answer any questions you might have. With that, Rebecca, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So a little bit about myself. My name is Rebecca Wright. I am an early careers specialist. I'm based out of Houston, and I've worked on the early careers talent acquisition team at BP for about 3.5 years now. Now, if any of you were at the conference in 2018, I did give a session around this topic as it was very relevant to us at the time, and we are happy to say that our plan kept in place and we were able to, in a stress-free way, transition into using our digital interviewing platform and using HireVue tools to seamlessly transition our recruitment efforts in our current environment. So what I'll be jumping into at this moment is giving a brief background on Hurricane Harvey. So for those of you that do not know, Hurricane Harvey was a Category 4 hurricane that hit Houston and the surrounding area in August of 2017. Now, the unique piece about this hurricane is that it actually hovered over the area for about 6 days, which resulted in quite a bit of flooding in the city of Houston. I'm going to go through a couple photos before I go into the statistics. This photo shows downtown Houston and shows the impact of the flooding from the hurricane. So most of the city was shut down for quite a bit of time. I'll move on to a couple photos that show specifically about BP's offices in Houston. The building to the right-hand side, so there's a low-rise building there, but there's also a high-rise. That is a home for around 5,000 BP employees in the Houston area. And you can see from the roads surrounding the building, this area was completely flooded. And what that meant for our home base, our building, is the building itself flooded the main floor, and we also had a basement in this building, and that basement completely flooded as well. So like I mentioned, around 5,000 employees were working out of this campus here. We were completely shut out of the campus, and we had to work from home for quite a bit of time. So here's one more photo. It's a little bit grainy, but this is the front of that building that we just saw. And I'll add a note that the person that took this photo is actually in a kayak, kind of showing how intense the flooding was here. And then finally, this is the area where we would go into our parking garage. That green sign in the back there is quite a tall sign. I think there's about 5 feet of water here, just to stress what the flooding was like and what the city was going through at this time. So to go through a couple of statistics to continue the story about the hurricane, there was about 51 inches of rain that fell over the 6 days. Not in all areas, but in most areas there was quite a bit of flooding. And as a result of that, around 204,000 homes were damaged. In that 2004 homes were the homes of BP employees. And I'll talk about BP's response to this epidemic in the Houston area. There were about 5,000 employees displaced from their offices, and we all had to start working from home at this time. And in addition to that, BP was able to respond to what was going on in Houston. They set up a call center in the Chicago area and asked BP employees up there to commit their time to take calls from employees in the Houston area that needed help finding resources. So as you can imagine, some resources such as finding contract workers. If your home floods, you do need to strip the drywall where the flooding was. And at that time, it was very difficult to find resources like those. There were corporate buildings that were using contractors and so many homes that needed help as well. The BP team up in Chicago was very helpful and crucial in putting the minds at ease of the families here in Houston that were impacted. Now, shifting over to the early careers team and how that impacted us at this point in time. For those of you listening to the webinar that are in campus recruiting, you know that the end of August, early September is crucial for campus recruiting. It is the kickoff of the campus recruitment year. And through the hurricane and Houston shutting down, BP has a large hiring presence in Houston for the US. We were a little bit nervous and knowing that we needed to come up with a plan B. So the impacts in Houston for BP is there was a 3 to 4 week travel ban that they placed for Houston employees. Employees were unable to fly out of the city. And then because of that, we had about 94 campus events that were impacted from our recruitment season. Again, being at that time of the year, super crucial for us. So we needed to start thinking about what is our next step and how we're going to continue recruiting effort, because losing that time and losing talent would be detrimental to our recruitment season. So what we did is we looked at our current process. So what you see on the screen on the PowerPoint here is our early careers process before Hurricane Harvey. So we'll talk through that for a moment. So the first step is obviously to source your talent. And sourcing your talent would come from presence at conferences, presence on campus, at career fairs, digital marketing, all of that good stuff to let the students know about our opportunities that we have. The second round is our first round interview, which we held in 2 different places. So most of our interviews at that time were on campus. So we had a traditional campus interview slate, but we were also at that time using HireVue on demand a little bit. The team wanted to expand our pipeline and to look at students at other universities, and the HireVue on demand tool was really great at allowing us to do this. For our second and final round, in the early careers team, we host an assessment center, which is essentially a full day interviewing event that the students come to. So what we do is we fly them into the location that they would be interviewing to work at. We'd put them up in a hotel, and then the following day, they would have a full day interviewing event consisting of an executive speaker, a technical interview, and then a group assessment that they would do together. And then the final round would, of course, be to find our top candidate and to extend them an offer. So as you can see through that process, there were a couple red flags with what was going on in Houston with Hurricane Harvey. We had quite a bit of hiring activity that we needed to do for Houston. We had 2 areas of concern. So the first area of concern that we saw was those campus interviews. If we had campus interviews that were taking place at University of Houston, that campus was in the midst of the flooding as well. How are we going to continue to interview those candidates and see them for the roles that we had? We were able to shift to a new plan pretty quickly for the first round of interviews. Like I mentioned before, we had already started using HireVue on demand a little bit for some of our, expanding of our pipeline. So what we did is we simply shifted those interviews to HireVue on demand, and it sort of forced us to look at that tool a little bit more seriously. And I'll show you in one of my later slides how that really did impact our process today. So we shifted those first round interviews to HireVue on demand, but our big problem area was our second round interview. Flying those students into the Houston area was not an option at this moment in time. We really didn't want to lose our top talent. So this is where we focused our efforts, and over the next 2 weeks began brainstorming, how are we going to see these students and how are we going to still give them a good experience and let them know about the opportunities that we have. So we jumped right into brainstorming. The first thing that we looked at was maybe we'll be able to send these students to one of our other BP locations, still able to meet the employees, feel the employee culture, and give them a sense for what it'd be like to work with us, also allowing us to meet them face to face. Thinking about that, the quick turnaround time that we needed to have and the resources that we had in some of our smaller sites, that option was not a viable option for what we needed to look for our 2017 fall recruitment season. So we moved on to the next piece, which was to reach out to our global talent acquisition team. BP is a global company and we have talent acquisition teams across. And so what we did was we reached out to some of our counterparts across the globe to see what others had done in this instance. Where had they not been able to bring candidate on site, what were they doing? In that, we found out that the talent acquisition team in Australia had actually piloted HireVue Live on a small scale, but had used the tool and had kind of gone through the actions with the P's integrations and all of that good stuff to see if it worked for them. What we did at that point was reached out to the Australia team, set up a quick call, and kind of talked to them to see what they found with the tool. They found that they really enjoyed the tool, and their interviewers and the candidates did as well. But one thing we noticed was the scale of what they were using it would not be on the scale that we would be using it. So kind of created a couple questions throughout that call, but being able to network with our counterparts was really helpful in doing this. The next piece, as we learned about HireVue Live, BP also had Skype for Business at that time that some teams were using for virtual interviews too. So we wanted to weigh our options between the two. We very quickly found that setting up around 100 interviews, as you'll see in a later slide, through Skype and getting the candidates to download Skype and setting them up manually was not a viable option for us, just for the volume scale. And we started seriously looking at HireVue and the Live tool to help us through this situation. So as we selected HireVue Live, we had a couple follow-up questions with our HR information systems team. Questions around, would they be able to handle the capacity? Do we have integrations built out with any of our tools? And we came to find that through the Australia pilot, we were in good hands, and that an automation had already been set up with our applicant tracking system, which would make things very easy for us to initiate the interviews. But it had also been set up with our address book internally at the company. So assigning interviewers in the tool would be quite easy as well. So that was really great news, and we felt very confident in the tool itself. And the last piece of our brainstorming session was simply to think about training. So many of our interviewers had only been used to a face-to-face interviewing style, and we needed to make sure that our interviewers and our stakeholders were taken along the journey with us, and that they were comfortable with the tool and were comfortable sitting down and speaking with a candidate through the screen. So as you can see on this slide, within the 2 weeks of brainstorming that we had, we did come up with kind of our plan B that we would use for the 2017 fall recruitment season. The first step that we had was to reach out to the candidates we wanted to set up an interview with. Now, HireVue does have a coordinate tool, and you'll see in a little bit that BP is playing around with that now, but at the time, with the short turnaround time that we had, we went ahead and reached out to the candidates via phone or email to get their availability. Once we had their availability, we went ahead and scheduled their interviews inside the HireVue Live tool. Now, something that we did because we were in short turnaround time is our team made a decision to assign subject matter experts who knew the HireVue Live tool inside and out. We're a team of about 10 recruiters, and upskilling all of us in such a short amount of time wasn't the best path forward for us with everything else going on in the recruitment season. So assigning the two subject matter experts that we had was very important to our success. We were able to get into the tool, mitigate issues as they arise, and just make sure things went smoothly. Once the candidates were scheduled in there, we also hosted training, which is the third spot there, training for our interviewers. Now, a method we took for training is, as we had interviews set up on a rolling basis, we thought it would be the best action is to set a standing training meeting once a week. It was on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And what we had was our recruiters, as they set up their interviews, to simply forward that training to the interviewers that were taking part. This allowed for our interviewers to all be aware of when the training was being placed. Our recruiters were fully knowledgeable of when training was taking place. And in addition to that, we had a kind of a weekly cadence. What we also did was we recorded that training, and we were able to send that to our interviewers as well. So of course, everyone's schedule is busy. If they weren't able to make it live, we gave them the option to just watch the training and follow up with questions later. And then the final spot is to execute the interview. As a result, for recruiting using HireVue Live in Houston for our Houston roles, we ended up executing around 100 interviews through the live tool. Now, this was a large uptick compared to the number of live interviews we had done in our team in the past. But I think through a lot of our training efforts and some of the tips and tricks that I'll mention a little bit later, it allowed for a smooth transition. Of those 100 interviews, we extended 46 offers to the students, and 40 of those students accepted our offers. In the end, we had really great feedback from both the candidates and our interviewers, actually. The interviewers were really impressed with the fact that they could sit in their dining room, like I am today, and to interview this candidate and to kind of interview them on their own time. And the candidate liked it as well. They enjoyed the flexibility. Students have a lot going on at school, and just knowing that they can set up a time that works for them is really crucial to the success and to their satisfaction with the tool. And then finally, we know that it is very important when a student is making a full-time job decision that they know where they're going, that they know the company's culture and the city that they're going to. So for those 40 offers, if they were full-time offers, once Houston was getting back to normal, we actually flew those students down to Houston for a super day to show them where they'd be working, to introduce them to their teams face-to-face, and to show them a little bit about Houston, just so they would know and feel confident in their decision to come and work for us in Houston. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I wanted you to pay attention to the on-demand shift that we made, and I wanted to touch on where we are today in 2020 with our process. So of course, we're still sourcing for talent, but you can see on the first round of interviews, campus interviews actually fell off of our assessment process. We do next day interviews on campus at a very, very small number of schools, depending on the program needs, as well as at conferences. But I would say about 98% of our first round interviews are done during HireVue On Demand. And it provides such immense flexibility to the students, but also for our interviewers at the company. It has been widely accepted. Our interviewers and students both love it. In terms of flexibility, they don't need to fly out to a company twice anymore to be interviewed. And I believe that HireVue On Demand is becoming more and more common. So students are being more widely accepted or acceptable to do an interview in this way. So we've moved most of our interviews to the HireVue On Demand tool after that. And then finally, I move on to the second round. We did go back to our assessment center model. We want, if we're doing a digital interview on the first round, we want to be able to interview them face-to-face at some point, as culture and the cultural fit is so important to us. But we have now a built-out option to use HireVue Live. Now, you don't need a natural disaster to go and use a live interviewing feature. This tool has been amazing for us to be able to interview top talent if they're, say, studying abroad. Especially in early careers, students have a lot going on, like I mentioned, but many students are studying abroad during the semester, and HireVue Live and having this kind of plan B process built in place for us allows us to quickly shift. You know, if they're not able to make that assessment day, okay, we have this other option, and our interviewers and our candidates alike are comfortable with it. And then finally, we will make our offer to our top candidate. So I want to close out just recapping of a couple of the things that I mentioned already and give you a business continuity checklist. So go ahead and screen grab this or take a photo of this. But this will encompass kind of everything we went through and what you can take back to your teams to put a business continuity plan in place. So the first thing I suggest doing is identify a subject matter expert or identify a lead to take on the plan B. We want to make sure that this person is very familiar with the process. If it is your secondary process, you may not be using it too much, but in the event that you need it, you would like to have somebody that knows how it works and knows the ins and outs, so you're not scrambling to pull things together at the last minute. Document your process. So the other thing that we did throughout this was to make sure to write everything down. We made process flows in the event that maybe a subject matter expert is out on leave or they change jobs, that everything is documented and written down that you can call on. Outline roles and responsibilities. So making sure that everybody knows what they're doing, that kind of goes hand in hand with documenting the process. Having a training schedule. I think this was part of our, a key part of our success, and our key part of our success specifically for our internal stakeholders. This was a last minute change, and change doesn't come easy to many people. But I think during our training, we were able to talk about some of the concerns they have and make sure that they felt really comfortable. And I truly believe the training that we offered them and made sure that they had it at their disposal was pivotal in our success. Document your training materials. So when we gave our trainings, we also documented what we were talking about so we could send it to them. So they had a hard copy as well. And then finally, I also believe that having a demo of the training recorded was crucial to our success as well. Like I mentioned before, that part of this time in campus recruiting is so fast-paced, and a couple days you may be able to lose a candidate. So we had some last-minute interviews being scheduled. Having that demo, we were able to send it to the interviewer the day before the interview. They were able to watch it, ask their follow-up questions, and feel completely comfortable going into the interview. And then finally, I just want to mention maintaining your line of communication. So during this time, it was super important for not only the early careers team to maintain very strong lines of communication, but also with our stakeholders, making sure, like I mentioned, they were comfortable with the tool and they knew what to expect was really important, and to ensure that everybody knew what piece was going where and nothing was being dropped. So finally, I want to shift into the impacts of COVID-19 currently in 2020. So I can speak specifically to the early careers team here in the US. Through the presentation I mentioned, we still are up to date on our use of HireVue Live and being able to shift to it should we need to. And in this instance, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, it was very stress-free for us to know, okay, at this point in time, this is what we're going through across the globe. The US Early Careers team is going to shift to our HireVue Live process. And that was really it. It was already built out, already in place. Our team had been using it here and there in order to interview top talent if they were unavailable for our assessment center days. But it really was a low stress shift for us. And we already had our training cadence in place and everything to kind of hit the ground running for the roles that we had remaining. But I will speak to the experienced hire team. So at BP, that means individuals with 5 years of experience or higher that are looking for a role, and our field-based type roles. Back in 2018, when I gave this presentation at the conference, those teams weren't using HireVue too much. Our global teams weren't really using the tool. But within recent years, there's been quite a shift in talent acquisition at BP to upskill everybody and upskill all the recruiters to use our HireVue tools. And I believe that that has helped alleviate a lot of stress in the talent acquisition community at BP, letting the recruiters know, have security and safety that they have these tools to use to be able to continue to serve their businesses. So HireVue On Demand is something that most of the teams are using at this point in time. But I do want to mention, of course, HireVue Live is now definitely an option that I think our experienced hire teams and our field-based teams are starting to use more and more. And then finally, we also have our coding assessment that we added to our tool belt of HireVue tools here. So all in all, I think going through Hurricane Harvey, it was definitely a stressful time, but I think we came out as an early careers team in the US, we came out on the other side with our kind of backup plan if anything were to happen. And in this case, in early 2020, that we're all working from home, students are all at home now, it's provided an incredible business continuity plan for us that we could seamlessly shift into. And with that, I just want to put up my information on the screen. You're more than welcome to reach out to me via email, with my email there, or also connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any follow-up questions.
All right, Rebecca, let's hop right in to just a couple questions. And first of all, thank you for walking us through that. That was fantastic. And, even having known the BP story for some time now, it's just really remarkable to have you go through that and share some additional context and color and insight on how you and your team managed maintaining that continuity during such a challenging time for the city of Houston and the state of Texas. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for all of the efforts that you and your team went through during that time. So let's start off. You brought up a point early on in your presentation that I wrote down right away because I thought it was so impactful, which is that the plan stayed in place. And so many people on our webinar today are thinking about how to navigate their recruitment strategies for this fall graduate season when they know they probably won't be able to go on campus. So they're designing a strategy based on the today. And you and your team designed a strategy based on your today that has then maintained for the tomorrow when things normalized again. I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So I think the key to our process being maintained throughout this and allowing us to quickly shift over to doing, our HireVue Live interviews 100% of the time at this point is the fact that when we started using HireVue Live a little bit more amidst the hurricane, it opened up the opportunity with the tool, that meaning the flexibility of offering interviews to candidates if they simply weren't able to make it physically to an interview. So we continued to use our Plan B quite a bit during our normal recruitment season, for example, in 2018 and 2019. I said this before, there's many times where a candidate simply, just from scheduling conflicts, cannot make it in person. And we feel that we don't want to miss out on that talent if it's simply times and dates not matching up. And being able to use HireVue Live opened the door for that. And we were able to continue to assess candidates even if they weren't able to make it on site. Definitely not our Plan A. We want to meet them. We want to show them where they'd be working. But it allowed us to continue to assess that candidate and to not lose them as a potential to fill the role. So we just continued to use it in pockets. And now that we're in this place where we need to use it 100% of the time, we're all very familiar with it still.
That's awesome. And now, you're sharing that you've shifted a little bit and 98% of all of those first round interviews are being leveraged through the HireVue On Demand. Let's talk a little bit about the outcomes of that. What are the candidates experiencing and sharing? What are the hiring managers experiencing and sharing as a result of that shift?
Yes, so very similar. I think as we started using the tools a little bit more, we saw some of the greatness behind it. We were able to see that candidates were able to make our interviews, our first round interviews through HireVue On Demand, regardless of what they had going on in their lives. If they had to work, if they had a shift to work, and the only slot we had left was when they had a test and we weren't able to interview with them in the past, we didn't have that hurdle anymore. Students are completely flexible with their time. When they take our interviews, we give them 3 days to take the interview so they can shift things around in their schedules and make, they can take the interview at midnight if they really want to. In a traditional sense, back in the day when we did on-campus interviews, there's no way we would have been able to do that. But now students can really flex with the time that they have. And on the flip side, our interviewers can as well. Our interviewers have full-time jobs. We have our business assess all of our candidates, and they're able to watch 3 interviews in the morning before their big meeting for the day. They're able to watch one while they're waiting at the dentist with a mobile tool. They really do enjoy the flexibility of it, and that they're not locked in for an entire 8-hour day doing candidate to candidate to candidate. Another added benefit of being able to split it up a little bit is they feel they're able to give more of their attention to the candidate. If you're interviewing for 8 hours straight, you as an interviewer get quite tired. So they feel that being able to split up the interviews a little bit makes each candidate have just as good as a shot to say their message, to give their answers, and that they have the interviewer's full attention. In addition to that, so that's the interviewer and candidate experience. I just want to talk about our pipeline metrics. So switching to HireVue On Demand completely opened our pipeline. In the past, our pipeline makeup of applicants was typically from the universities that we had a physical presence at. In the United States, it is very hard to have a presence at every university in the country. And opening up our pipeline and assessing that first round on HireVue On Demand really allowed us to see a much larger number of candidates. And our business saw that. they were able to see students come in from these universities that weren't quite on our radar a couple years ago. And now they're really excited about that. They're excited to see where they're going to be able to find their top talent, and we're not restricted from the smaller number of schools that we have a physical presence at.
That's fantastic. And it's always so great to hear directly from a customer what that experience is. At a macro level at HireVue, north of 40% of the candidates who go through a video experience take it during non-business hours. About 50% are taking it, from a mobile device. And it sounds like those stats are really relevant for what you guys went through as well, just giving candidates that flexibility and that opportunity to go through the experience. And on the outcome,
absolutely.
That was just great. And on the outcome, it sounds like what happens is you were able to maintain those offer acceptance rates. So, 46 offers extended, 40 offers accepted. That's an 87% offer acceptance rate. Again, as you think about recruitment during a natural disaster, how important were those statistics for you and your hiring teams to make sure that you were able to make sure that those offer acceptance rates were maintained?
Absolutely. So I will say up front, our acceptance rates are typically around that, be that in an in-person interview for our second round. But we were incredibly happy to see that students were still interested in coming and working for BP and accepting the opportunities we have. And I think I attributed that back to BP's resilience as a company. Through a natural disaster, it's so important to us. We want to make sure that those universities in Houston that we typically recruit at, we want to give those students the same opportunity that they would have had if nothing had happened. So it's in the forefront of our mind, and going back to business continuity, we want to make sure that we're continuing to offer students opportunities and to give them the same level of attention that they would should none of this had happened. So I think because of that, and the fact that students were able to see that we were still making an effort, we were still trying to work a couple roadblocks there. I think the fact that they saw that effort, it allowed us to continue to maintain our brand and to show them that we really value early careers programs, and we really value our internships and our graduate hires, and we'll really do anything to make sure that we continue that.
Awesome. So, Rebecca, before we wrap up this section and hop into some Q&A from the participants, just sort of again thinking about the plan stayed, and gosh, it was a challenging time. You're launching new strategy, you're launching new technology, you're leaning into a virtual environment. And then that virtual experience stayed along the way. Can you share a little bit, just as we wrap, on how you did that from a change management perspective, sort of you and your team, how you were able to accomplish that really significant task?
Sure. So for 2017, when Hurricane Harvey was here and we were looking for a plan forward for our recruitment season, we were in a situation where it was sort of our only option for Houston. And I think that helped in getting individuals on board. But as we started using the tool and we started seeing success in the tool and making offers and candidates accepting, we started building a team of champions throughout the business that we typically call upon today, in terms of situations where we have a new interviewer that we're telling them about the tool and say, hey, we can shift this to virtual interviewing so we can get that candidate in sooner. We're able to call on our story before and talk to some of those hiring teams that used HireVue Live and they saw success in it, whether that be hiring a great intern that did quite well that summer, or even hiring a graduate hire that came into their team. And who knows, that new interviewer that is getting on board with HireVue Live, they may actually know that graduate and be able to think to themselves, well, they hired her and she's really great. Maybe our team will be able to find the same success. So we really do leverage the teams that have interviewed with us before and use the technology to leverage them as our champions and to be able to get buy-in with the other businesses coming on board.
Awesome. Love that. So let's go ahead and pop into the chat and see what some folks are asking. So this first question is a really nice piggyback, actually, on what we were just chatting about, which is, can you share any additional details on training for the leads or the subject matter experts regarding quick deployment? So how did you get everybody up and running so fast?
Sure. So I was personally one of the subject matter experts on the early careers team. So I'm a great person to talk about this, as I led many of the trainings. But essentially myself and a colleague of mine, we were on the front lines with all the brainstorming I talked about before, with the talent acquisition teams globally, with the HR information systems teams, really getting in the weeds of how everything worked together. And that really upskilled the early careers team to be able to understand everything. It was really just getting in there, playing around and trying things out and working with those key players in BP to figure out our process. In terms of training our stakeholders and getting our interviewers up to speed, the training was an hour. And what we covered in that training was why we're doing this. We want to tell them, why we're shifting to this model. Most of them knew, but just making sure, and then telling them why this will work, why this is going to work for them, why it will be beneficial. So we started there, and then we simply went into the tool itself. So we did a demo. We actually shared your screen. I had a colleague of mine join as a candidate, and I showed them exactly what they would be seeing. So that was foolproof. They were able to see everything that I'm clicking on. They could ask me questions in the moment on what some of the pieces were about the tool. It is technology, so we wanted to make sure we were showing them exactly what they would be seeing, but also touch on some of the inevitable parts about doing a virtual interview: audio, talking to them about, maybe have a pair of headphones close by in case there's any audio feedback. Talk to them about their connection. So some of those simple things you may not think about, but we want to make sure we got into a training so that we could cover everything. And allow them to ask questions too. We also followed up with that with an FAQ. So we made sure to write all of that out and send it to them. That's what I'm talking about documenting your training processes. And then, like I mentioned already, we also recorded one of the sessions. So we recorded one of the sessions and we included it in the body of the training that simply said, here's the live training, join it at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. If you can't, the training's linked right here. And most people joined the live training. It was new to them, so they wanted to make sure, they are representing BP in that moment. They wanted to make sure they knew what was going on and everything. So they did attend the training, but giving them those resources, giving them the recording and the write-up of the FAQ and showing them exactly what the tool looks like, clicking through it, don't just send screenshots. I think that was really helpful in training our stakeholders and adding to that buy-in that I was talking about earlier.
That's awesome. Is there anything that you do in candidate communication to explain the process and so that candidates know what to expect?
Yep. So I talked about our process, our during the Hurricane Harvey process. Is our initial point was to reach out to them for availability. Of course, there was a cadence going on with the recruiter and the candidate. And once they locked down a time, we had a simple template that wrote out a couple tips and tricks for them as well. So I mentioned the same type of stuff I mentioned to my interviewers. It's actually in a training that we facilitate on campus today, but it's around things like your audio quality, making sure you have headphones close by, making sure that your computer is, raised up, you have good lighting, all of those types of things, because we wanted them to be successful too. And we didn't want them to not or feel that they don't have a great interview simply because of a technology piece. So we tried to provide them with as many tips and tricks as we could to ensure their success. So giving them that information, but then, giving their interviewers similar information so they could work together. Of course, there were some hiccups with some interviews. That is inevitable with technology. But as they came up, we were able to add that into our FAQ, add that into our tips, and train our interviews and our candidates going forward. So we did go through some rough patches at the beginning, but at this point in time, I feel that we've seen everything, and we're pretty smooth at this point.
I think that's really terrific and really important too for the audience to remember that this is all really agile, right? So you send out that communication. If you learn something as a result and something needs to be changed or adjusted, it can be. You're not married to any one specific thing. Another
Absolutely.
question that popped up here, and you touched on it briefly in your presentation, but I'm wondering if you can expand on it a little bit, is just the plans for the fall. You're in a position right now, like everyone else, where times have changed once again. So how will you be launching your fall recruitment season?
Sure. So I don't have much information to share at the moment, as things, as everybody knows, are changing. It's what it seems like every day. But going into the fall, we are, closely monitoring our universities. So all of our universities that we partner with and attend in the fall recruitment season, they all have some decisions that they're making as well. I find that recruiting teams, early careers recruiting teams, so companies and universities are starting to work together to figure out, what are they doing? What are we planning on doing? So we're looking at virtual options for things such as career fairs as well in partnership with the schools. So I can imagine a lot of that would happen. But in terms of recruiting and filling our positions, I can imagine that we would, like I mentioned, leverage our business continuity plan that we already have in place, as it's already there and it works quite well for us already. So really confident that if that's what we need to do in the fall, that we'll be able to shift seamlessly, with a little bit of training on the front end for the rest of the recruiters on my team, so that we don't need to use the subject matter expert format anymore. That was due to having a short amount of time. At this point in time, most of us, because we are dealing with one-off cases where we need to schedule these, most of us are up to speed on how to get those in the tool. So I can imagine that we would simply move to our plan B and start using the HireView Live tool for that second round of interviews.
All right, so that is all the time we have for questions now. If you submitted a question in the chat and we didn't get to it, please know that we will respond to you with an answer. With that, I would like to thank all of you for joining us, and a huge thank you to you, Rebecca, for taking the time to walk us through some of these remarkable things that you and your team did. Very much appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no problem at all. And thank you for letting me share.
Awesome, thank you.